It was a rainy afternoon in the city, where neon lights flickered against the gray sky and streets glistened with puddles. Among the crowd, a small figure darted between people, clutching something close to her chest. Her name was Lila, a frail 14-year-old girl with tangled hair and eyes too old for her age. In her tiny hands she held a sandwich, stolen from the corner store just minutes ago. Behind her, angry footsteps pounded the pavement. "Stop! Thief!" a shopkeeper shouted, his voice cutting through the air. Lila's heart hammered in her chest. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't a bad kid. She was just hungry. Her mother, Elena, was lying in a hospital bed, too weak to move, too sick to work, and Lila hadn't eaten in 2 days. That sandwich wasn't just food, it was survival. She turned into a narrow alley, desperate to escape. Her small body slipped past trash bins, her shoes soaked by puddles, her breath ragged. But she could hear the heavy steps getting closer. And then, she slammed straight into someone. A tall man, dressed in an expensive suit, nearly dropped the briefcase he was carrying. His sharp jawline, polished shoes, and cold stare made him look completely out of place in the dirty alley. This was Adrian Blackwell, a billionaire whose name was whispered with both awe and envy in business circles. He looked down at the trembling girl clutching a half-crushed sandwich. His eyes narrowed. "What's this?" he muttered. Behind them, the shopkeeper appeared, panting. "There she is. That little thief stole from me." Adrian's gaze shifted between the furious shopkeeper and the terrified child in front of him. Lila's lips trembled, her eyes glistening with tears. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she pleaded, "Please, don't call the police. My mom, she's sick. She hasn't eaten. I just wanted to help her." For a moment, Adrian felt nothing. His life was built on deals, contracts, numbers, things that didn't require feelings. Children begging on the street? He had seen plenty. Usually he walked away. But this time was different. There was something in her voice, desperation mixed with innocence, that pierced through the walls he had built around his heart. He let out a sharp breath, turning to the shopkeeper. "It's just a sandwich. Let it go. I'll pay you double." The shopkeeper blinked, surprised, but the promise of money silenced his anger. He grumbled under his breath and walked away. Now it was just Adrian and the girl. Lila still clutched the sandwich, shaking as if expecting him to snatch it away. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone cold but not unkind. "Lila," she whispered. "And your mother? You said she's sick?" Lila nodded quickly, eyes wide with fear that he might change his mind. "She's in the hospital. I don't know what to do anymore." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. He should walk away. He had meetings to attend, contracts to sign. He didn't even know this girl. But something inside him shifted, a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. "Take me to her," he said at last. Lila's eyes widened, not sure if she had heard correctly. But then, with trembling hands, she reached for his sleeve and began to guide him through the streets. Minutes later, they stepped into the cold fluorescent halls of a rundown hospital. The walls smelled of disinfectant, and the faint beeping of machines echoed through the air. Nurses hurried past, too busy to notice the billionaire in their midst. Lila led him into a small room. On the bed lay Elena, a woman in her 30s, her skin pale, her body frail. Wires and tubes connected her to a machine that monitored her heart. She opened her eyes slowly when she heard her daughter's voice. "Mom? I brought someone," Lila said softly. Elena smiled weakly, raising a trembling hand to touch her daughter's face. But before she could speak, the heart monitor let out a piercing alarm. The line on the screen went flat. Lila screamed. Nurses rushed in. "We're losing her," one shouted. Adrian froze as chaos erupted around him. Doctors pushed him aside, placing paddles on Elena's chest. "Clear." A shock of electricity jolted her body. "What? Twice? 3 times?" The monitor beeped, and then mercifully a faint rhythm returned. Lila collapsed against her mother's bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Adrian stood in the corner, shaken. He had faced billion-dollar risks, hostile takeovers, ruthless boardroom battles. But nothing felt as terrifying as the sight of that small girl begging her mother not to die. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something stir in his chest. Something he had long buried. And he didn't know it yet, but this moment, this desperate little girl and her dying mother, would change his life forever. The hospital room slowly quieted after the chaos. Machines beeped steadily, nurses whispered among themselves, and Lila clung to her mother's fragile hand as if afraid to let go. Elena's breathing was shallow, her face pale, but she was alive. Adrian stood near the door, his hands buried in his pockets. He told himself he should leave. This wasn't his problem. He didn't even know these people. Yet something held him there, something he couldn't explain. Moments later, a doctor entered the room, adjusting his glasses with a grave expression. He glanced at Elena, then at Lila, and finally at Adrian, assuming he was a relative. She survived the cardiac arrest, but the doctor's voice dropped. Her heart is failing. Without a very specific medication, her chances of living through the week are slim. Lila's head snapped up. Medication? Then give it to her. Please. The doctor hesitated. It's not so simple. The drug is experimental and extremely expensive. Insurance won't cover it. Most families can't. He stopped, noticing the despair on Lila's face. I'm sorry. The words hit like a hammer. Lila's shoulders shook. She buried her face in Elena's sheets, sobbing. Adrian turned to the doctor. His voice was calm, almost cold. How much? The doctor blinked. Sir? I asked how much, Adrian repeated. The number that followed was outrageous, more than most people earned in several years. But to Adrian, it was just a fraction of a day's earnings. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded. Get her the drug. Now. The doctor's eyes widened. Are you sure? It's highly experimental. There are risks. Do it, Adrian ordered. His tone carried the authority of a man used to getting things done. Lila stared at him through her tears, disbelief shining in her eyes. You do that? For us. Adrian didn't answer. He just looked away, almost uncomfortable under her gaze. Hours later, a nurse returned with the medication. Lila held her breath as they prepared to inject it into her mother's foreline. This was hope. This was life. She whispered softly, Mom, you'll get better now. You have to. Adrian remained silent, watching every detail. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. He was just seeing this through. But then it happened. Minutes after the drug entered Elena's system, her body convulsed. The heart monitor went wild, alarms screaming once more. Nurses rushed in, shouting orders. She's reacting, one cried. Get the crash cart. Lila froze in terror. What's happening? You said this would help her. The doctor's voice was grim. Her body is rejecting it. We might lose her. Lila turned desperately to Adrian, her tiny hands clutching his sleeve. Tears streamed down her face. Please, do something. You promised. For the first time in years, Adrian felt powerless. He could buy companies, silence enemies, control markets. But here, money couldn't guarantee life. The sight of the girl's pleading eyes tore at something inside him, something buried deep. Fight, Elena, the doctor urged, shocking her chest again and again. Stay with us. Lila's cries echoed through the room. Mom, please don't leave me. Adrian stood frozen, torn between leaving, between protecting himself from this unbearable pain, or staying and risking a part of himself he had long locked away. At last, after what felt like hours, the heart monitor steadied. Elena's body stilled. Her breathing returned, faint but present. She had survived, barely. The medical team sighed in relief but warned, her condition is fragile. Another episode like this and she may not recover. Lila collapsed against her mother's chest, trembling with relief and exhaustion. She whispered through her sobs, thank you for coming back to me. Adrian looked at them, mother and daughter clinging to each other, broken but unyielding. And something inside him shifted. For once, his wealth, his power, his name, all of it felt small compared to this fragile thread of love. He turned to leave but a tiny voice stopped him. Mr. Adrian, Lila's voice was hoarse, almost gone from crying. Please don't leave us. I don't know what I'll do if she gets worse. I can't do this alone. Adrian froze in the doorway. The rational part of him screamed to walk away. But his heart, the heart he thought he no longer had, wasn't listening. This wasn't just a sick woman and a hungry child. This was a test of who he was, and who he could become. The hospital ward was quiet that night. The chaos of the day had faded, leaving only the steady rhythm of machines and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Lila sat by her mother's bedside, her small fingers entwined with Elena's fragile hand. She hadn't let go once. Adrian stood a few steps away, leaning against the wall. He told himself he should leave. He had board meetings tomorrow, contracts waiting for his signature, an empire that couldn't run itself. But every time he turned toward the door, Lila's soft voice pulled him back. Mom, she whispered, stroking Elena's hair, you're going to be okay. I'll take care of you. I promise. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to promises. In his world, promises were broken daily as easily as tearing a sheet of paper. Yet here this girl spoke with a conviction stronger than any deal he'd ever signed. The next morning the doctor returned with news. His expression was serious but hopeful. Elena survived the reaction, but her condition is still unstable. The medication bought her time, nothing more. She'll need constant monitoring and possibly a surgical procedure in the future. Lila's face lit up at the word time. Time was all she wanted. Time meant another sunrise with her mother. But then the doctor's gaze hardened. However, her insurance doesn't cover long-term care. Without financial support, she won't get the treatment she needs. Lila froze. The color drained from her face. She knew what that meant. Bills. More money than she could ever imagine. Her eyes darted to Adrian. For a moment she said nothing, afraid to ask. But desperation won. She whispered, "Please, don't let her die. I'll do anything. I'll work for you, I'll clean your house, I'll..." Her voice cracked, too broken to continue. Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Instead he looked at Elena, her pale face, her chest rising weakly with each breath. Then at Lila, who was trembling but standing tall, refusing to give in to despair. Something inside him shifted again. He wasn't sure if it was pity, guilt, or something else. "You won't work for me," he said finally, his voice low. "You'll stay here with her. I'll handle the costs." Lila blinked, stunned. You mean it?" He almost smiled, though his eyes remained distant. "I don't say things I don't mean." For the first time in days, relief washed over Lila's face. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Adrian. Thank you." Adrian didn't know why he was doing this. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a hero. But the way that girl looked at him, as if he were the only lifeline left in her sinking world, made walking away impossible. Days turned into weeks. Adrian visited the hospital more often than he admitted to himself. At first, he told his assistant it was business in the area. Soon he stopped making excuses. Every time he arrived, Lila's eyes lit up. She'd rush to tell him about her mother's small improvements. A stronger heartbeat, a steadier breath, a whisper of a smile. And sometimes Elena herself would wake. Her voice was weak, but her words carried warmth. "Lila tells me you've been helping us," she murmured one evening, her tired eyes meeting Adrian's. "Why?" Adrian hesitated. He could have said it was nothing. He could have shrugged it off as charity or even pity. But the truth slipped out before he could stop it. "Because she asked me to." He glanced at Lila, who was dozing in a chair, her head resting against her folded arms. Elena smiled faintly. "She has that effect on people. Makes them see the good they've forgotten." Adrian looked away. He didn't believe in good. Not in his world. But still, something about those words lingered. One night, as he was preparing to leave, he found Lila waiting for him in the hallway. Her eyes were red, her voice soft. "Mr. Adrian, why are you helping us? People like you don't usually care about people like us." Her honesty startled him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally, "Maybe I don't know why either." She studied him for a moment, then whispered, "Maybe it's because you have a heart, even if you don't think so." Adrian walked away before she could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. But deep down her words followed him. A heart. His life had been about numbers, deals, empires. He thought his heart had turned to stone long ago. Yet here he was, night after night, drawn back to a frail woman and her desperate daughter. And though he didn't realize it yet, this was only the beginning. The hospital corridors were silent, except for the distant hum of machines. Mark sat in the waiting area, his face buried in his hands, while Emily clung to him, eyes swollen from crying. Inside the room, Anna lay motionless, her frail body surrounded by wires and tubes. The doctors had done all they could. Her heart had stopped twice already, and each time they brought her back, the toll on her body grew heavier. But then something unbelievable happened. Anna's hand twitched. It was barely noticeable, but Emily saw it first. She gasped and ran to the bed, holding her mother's hand tightly. "Mom? Mom, it's me, Emily. I'm right here." Tears streamed down her face. Mark jumped up, staring in shock as Anna's eyelids fluttered open. "Emily," Anna whispered, her voice weak but real. The doctors rushed in, astonished. This wasn't supposed to happen. By every medical standard, Anna shouldn't have survived. Her heart had endured too much, her body too frail. But somehow she was still here. Still breathing. Still fighting. It was nothing short of a miracle. Days turned into weeks, and against all odds, Anna grew stronger. Her body began to heal. The dark circles under her eyes faded, replaced by a fragile glow of life. The day she took her first steps with Emily holding her arm, the entire hospital staff stood and applauded. They had witnessed something no textbook could explain. For Mark, it was life-changing. He had spent years drowning in deals, contracts, and endless boardroom battles, but none of that mattered anymore. Watching Anna walk again, seeing Emily's smile light up the room, he realized what true wealth really meant. And he was determined never to lose it again. Weeks later, a black limousine pulled up outside a mansion overlooking the city. Emily's eyes widened as she stepped out, clutching her mother's hand. The place was enormous. White pillars, a sweeping staircase, crystal windows that glittered under the afternoon sun. She had only seen houses like this in movies. Is this really our home?" she whispered. Mark smiled, bending down to look at her. "It's not just a house, Emily. It's a promise. A promise that you and your mother will never suffer again." Emily ran up the stairs, her laughter echoing through the wide halls. For the first time in years, the sound of joy filled the air. Anna, still weak but walking on her own, touched the marble walls, disbelief in her eyes. She turned to Mark, voice trembling. Why would you do this for us?" Mark looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "Because I owe you my life. I owe Emily my soul. And because I can't undo the past, but I can change the future." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she leaned into his embrace. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt safe, protected, wanted. Life in the mansion was unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. There were rooms bigger than their entire old apartment, gardens that stretched for acres, and a piano that Mark insisted Emily learn to play. But what truly mattered wasn't the luxury, it was the sense of security. Emily no longer feared eviction notices taped to their door. She no longer had to worry about her mother's next hospital bill. For once she could be a child again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stood by the balcony with Mark. The city lights flickered below, a sea of stars on the ground. She tugged on his sleeve, her eyes sparkling. "Mr. Mark, does this mean we're a family now?" Mark's throat tightened. He had never thought of himself as a father. He had spent his life avoiding emotional ties, burying himself in ambition. But looking at Emily, he knew the answer. "Yes, Emily," he said softly, pulling her into a hug. "We're a family." Anna watched from the doorway, her heart swelling. For the first time since tragedy had entered their lives, hope filled the air. And it wasn't fragile anymore, it was strong, rooted in something real. But deep inside, Mark knew this was only the beginning. The mansion wasn't just a gift. It was a foundation. A chance to build something greater, not just for Anna and Emily, but for others who had suffered like them. Because true redemption, he realized, wasn't just about saving one family. It was about saving many. And so, as Emily fell asleep in her new bed, and Anna sat peacefully by the window, Mark made a silent vow. This house would become more than just a home. It would become a symbol of hope. The mansion was quiet that night. The kind of silence that felt heavy, not empty, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Anna sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. Emily was asleep upstairs, tucked safely under layers of blankets softer than anything she'd ever known. And Mark, he was in his study, alone, staring at a blank page. On the desk lay a pen. Beside it, an untouched glass of whiskey. Mark had once found comfort at the bottom of such glasses, drowning guilt with silence, but tonight he wanted clarity. Tonight he was facing something bigger than himself. He pressed the pen to the paper, his hand trembling. "The Emily Foundation," he wrote at the top. The name itself stopped him cold. Emily, the little girl who had stolen medicine to save her mother. Emily, who had looked at him not with fear but with hope, when the world had abandoned them. She wasn't just a child. She was the reason he still believed redemption was possible. Mark leaned back in his chair, memories flooding him. Deals, boardrooms, endless nights of chasing numbers. Yet not a single one of those victories had ever brought him peace. But the moment Emily had hugged him on the balcony and called him family, something inside him shifted. For the first time he knew what he was meant to do. The next morning, sunlight poured through the mansion's tall windows. Anna found Mark in the dining room, papers spread out before him. She noticed the heading immediately. The Emily Foundation. "What is this?" she asked, her voice still soft from sleep. Mark looked up, his expression serious but filled with a spark she hadn't seen before. "It's the beginning of something new. A foundation to help families like yours, families that are fighting, but don't have the means to survive. Anna blinked, stunned. You want to help others? I need to, Mark replied firmly. I've wasted too much time thinking wealth was about power. But real wealth is giving back what you've been given. You and Emily reminded me of that. Anna's eyes softened. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You've already done more for us than I could ever imagine. Why would you go further? Mark smiled faintly. Because helping just one family isn't enough. There are thousands more Emilis out there trying to keep their mothers alive. Thousands of mothers like you fighting every breath. If I can change even a fraction of their stories, then maybe I can forgive myself too. Anna's throat tightened. She had never seen this side of him, vulnerable yet determined. It wasn't the Mark who hid behind business suits and cold stares. This was a man rebuilding himself from the ashes of regret. Weeks later, the announcement shook the city. Mark, the ruthless billionaire who once built an empire on unrelenting ambition, stood before cameras in a press conference. But instead of his usual tailored armor, he wore something simple. His voice, too, was different, steady but filled with an honesty that silenced the room. I have lived most of my life believing that wealth was measured in numbers, in profits, in the empires we build. But I was wrong. True wealth is in the lives we save. True legacy is in the hope we give. Today I stand here not as a businessman, but as a man who was given a second chance, by a little girl named Emily. And in her honor, I am establishing the Emily Foundation. The room buzzed with murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Photographers snapped pictures. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the ripple this moment would create. Back at the mansion, Emily watched the press conference from the living room. She tilted her head curiously, not quite understanding the weight of her name echoing across television screens. Mom, she asked, tugging at Anna's sleeve, why is he saying my name on TV? Anna pulled her daughter close, her heart swelling with pride. Because, sweetheart, you're his reason. You gave him hope. Emily blinked, her small lips forming a smile. So, I helped him too. Anna kissed her forehead gently. More than you'll ever know. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Applications poured in from struggling families, hospitals, and clinics desperate for aid. Mark worked tirelessly, meeting with doctors, community leaders, and volunteers. He wasn't just signing checks. He was there, sleeves rolled up, listening to stories, shaking hands, and promising change. For every child who reminded him of Emily, he felt the mission deepen. For every mother who resembled Anna's strength, he felt his resolve grow. The Emily Foundation wasn't just a charity. It was redemption carved into reality. And for Anna and Emily, it was proof that their pain had not been endured in vain. One evening, long after the cameras had left and the boardrooms were empty, Mark sat on the same balcony where Emily had once asked if they were a family. This time Anna joined him, her hair flowing gently in the night breeze. You've changed, she said softly. Mark turned his gaze to her, eyes heavy with truth. No. I'm finally becoming who I should have been all along. Anna smiled faintly, resting her hand over his. For the first time in years, both of them looked toward the future not with fear, but with hope. The hospital corridors were silent, except for the distant hum of machines. Mark sat in the waiting area, his face buried in his hands, while Emily clung to him, eyes swollen from crying. Inside the room, Anna lay motionless, her frail body surrounded by wires and tubes. The doctors had done all they could. Her heart had stopped twice already, and each time they brought her back, the toll on her body grew heavier. But then, something unbelievable happened. Anna's hand twitched. It was barely noticeable, but Emily saw it first. She gasped and ran to the bed, holding her mother's hand tightly. Mom? Mom, it's me, Emily. I'm right here. Tears streamed down her face. Mark jumped up, staring in shock as Anna's eyelids fluttered open. Emily, Anna whispered, her voice weak but real. The doctors rushed in, astonished. This wasn't supposed to happen. By every medical standard, Anna shouldn't have survived. Her heart had endured too much, her body too frail. But somehow she was still here. Still breathing. Still fighting. It was nothing short of a miracle. Days turned into weeks, and against all odds, Anna grew stronger. Her body began to heal. The dark circles under her eyes faded, replaced by a fragile glow of life. The day she took her first steps with Emily holding her arm, the entire hospital staff stood and applauded. They had witnessed something no textbook could explain. For Mark, it was life-changing. He had spent years drowning in deals, contracts, and endless boardroom battles, but none of that mattered anymore. Watching Anna walk again, seeing Emily's smile light up the room, he realized what true wealth really meant. and he was determined never to lose it again. Weeks later, a black limousine pulled up outside a mansion overlooking the city. Emily's eyes widened as she stepped out, clutching her mother's hand. The place was enormous: white pillars, a sweeping staircase, crystal windows that glittered under the afternoon sun. She had only seen houses like this in movies. Is this really our home?" she whispered. Mark smiled, bending down to look at her. "It's not just a house, Emily. It's a promise. A promise that you and your mother will never suffer again." Emily ran up the stairs, her laughter echoing through the wide halls. For the first time in years, the sound of joy filled the air. Anna, still weak but walking on her own, touched the marble walls, disbelief in her eyes. She turned to Mark, voice trembling. Why would you do this for us?" Mark looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "Because I owe you my life. I owe Emily my soul. And because I can't undo the past, but I can change the future." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she leaned into his embrace. For the first time she didn't feel like a burden. She felt safe, protected, wanted. Life in the mansion was unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. There were rooms bigger than their entire old apartment, gardens that stretched for acres, and a piano that Mark insisted Emily learn to play. But what truly mattered wasn't the luxury, it was the sense of security. Emily no longer feared eviction notices taped to their door. She no longer had to worry about her mother's next hospital bill. For once she could be a child again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stood by the balcony with Mark. The city lights flickered below, a sea of stars on the ground. She tugged on his sleeve, her eyes sparkling. "Mr. Mark, does this mean we're a family now?" Mark's throat tightened. He had never thought of himself as a father. He had spent his life avoiding emotional ties, burying himself in ambition. But looking at Emily, he knew the answer. "Yes, Emily," he said softly, pulling her into a hug. "We're a family." Anna watched from the doorway, her heart swelling. For the first time since tragedy had entered their lives, hope filled the air. And it wasn't fragile anymore, it was strong, rooted in something real. But deep inside, Mark knew this was only the beginning. The mansion wasn't just a gift. It was a foundation. A chance to build something greater, not just for Anna and Emily, but for others who had suffered like them. Because true redemption, he realized, wasn't just about saving one family. It was about saving many. And so, as Emily fell asleep in her new bed, and Anna sat peacefully by the window, Mark made a silent vow. This house would become more than just a home. It would become a symbol of hope. The storm of criticism didn't vanish overnight, but slowly something began to change. For every angry headline there came another story. A boy in a rural town whose surgery had been funded by the Emily Foundation. A single mother who received life-saving treatment she couldn't afford. A family who had been living in their car until the foundation stepped in to cover rent and groceries. These weren't numbers on a page, they were faces, names, lives. And the public noticed. News stations began covering the success stories. Volunteers posted photos online with the caption, "Hope is real." Slowly, the tide of doubt gave way to cautious belief. One afternoon, Mark, Anna, and Emily attended the opening of the foundation's first children's clinic. Bright murals covered the walls, balloons floated in the air, and laughter echoed through the halls. Mark cut the ribbon with Emily at his side, the crowd cheering as cameras flashed. "Mr. Wallace, how does it feel?" a reporter shouted. Mark smiled, glancing at Emily, who clutched his hand proudly. "It feels like the first step. This isn't about me. It's about them. And it's only the beginning." For Anna, watching Mark speak was surreal. The man who once buried himself in profit margins now spoke of compassion, of second chances, of hope. She could hardly believe this was the same person who had walked into their lives only months ago. But as the applause rang out, a pair of eyes watched from the back of the crowd, sharp, calculating, waiting. That evening, after the clinic opening, Mark received an invitation. It was embossed, formal, the kind of card only the wealthiest sent. The signature at the bottom made his stomach twist. Richard Hale. Richard was more than a business rival. He was the kind of man Mark once was, ruthless, charming, and utterly without conscience. They had crossed paths years ago in boardrooms and negotiations, both clawing for dominance. But while Mark had stepped back from that world, Richard had only dug deeper. The invitation read, "A private dinner. Let's discuss your new venture." Mark crumpled the card in his fist. He knew Richard well enough to understand, this wasn't a friendly invitation. It was a warning. The dinner was held in an exclusive restaurant, the kind with gold chandeliers and velvet chairs. Richard sat at the head of a long table, a glass of red wine in hand. His smile was polished but his eyes were cold. "Mark," he said smoothly, standing to greet him. "It's been far too long. I must say you've been busy. Saving children, changing lives, becoming a saint in the eyes of the media. Quite the rebranding." Mark sat down, his jaw tight. "This isn't about rebranding. It's about making a difference." Richard chuckled, swirling his wine. "Come now. You and I both know the game. Philanthropy is just business by another name. Good press, tax benefits, influence. But you've gone too far. You're threatening the balance." "The balance?" Mark frowned. "Yes." Richard leaned forward, his smile sharpening. "While you're handing out hope, I'm acquiring hospitals, clinics, pharmaceuticals. There's profit in sickness, Mark. Always has been. And your little foundation is costing me." Mark's blood ran cold. He had suspected corruption in the system, but hearing it spoken so casually was different. "I'm not stopping," he said firmly. Richard's smile faded. His eyes darkened. "Then you're making yourself an enemy, old friend. And I don't play fair." Later that night, back at the mansion, Anna noticed the tension in Mark's shoulders. He sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair. "What happened?" she asked softly. Mark hesitated, then sighed. "Richard Hale. He sees the foundation as a threat. He's building his empire on suffering and we're standing in his way." Anna's eyes widened. "So what does that mean?" "It means," Mark said grimly, "that this fight just got bigger. It's no longer just about proving I've changed. It's about protecting this mission, protecting you and Emily, from people who destroy us to protect their profit." Anna placed her hand over his, steadying him. "Then we face it together. You're not alone anymore, Mark." Her words steadied him. For years he had fought battles with nothing but ambition and pride. Now for the first time he had something worth protecting, a family, a mission, a reason beyond himself. The next morning the threat became real. The foundation's accounts were audited without warning. Permits for new clinics were suddenly delayed. Contractors began backing out of projects, citing pressure from investors. Anonymous articles flooded the media again, painting Mark as a manipulator, claiming the Emily Foundation was laundering money. It was Richard's hand. Mark could see it in every blow. But instead of backing down, Mark doubled his efforts. He appeared at every site personally. He reassured donors, spoke directly to families, and refused to let the mission stall. And when the weight of it all threatened to crush him, he would remember Emily's words, "Families don't give up." One evening, after another long day of battling obstacles, Emily ran up to him with a crayon drawing in her hands. It showed a big house with 3 stick figures inside, Mark, Anna, and Emily, standing under a bright sun. Above them she had written in messy, crooked letters, "Family forever." Mark stared at it for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms, his eyes burning with unshed tears. In that moment he knew, no matter how powerful Richard was, no matter how many shadows tried to drag him back, he would not stop. Because he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them. The weeks that followed were suffocating. What had once been a wave of hope now felt like a battlefield. Every step forward the Emily Foundation tried to take was blocked by invisible hands. Permits denied. Partners mysteriously withdrawing. Donations frozen without explanation. Mark knew exactly whose fingerprints were on this sabotage. Richard Hale wasn't just leaning on his empire, he was squeezing. Art. But the worst was yet to come. One night, as rain lashed against the mansion windows, Anna returned from the grocery store, her hands trembling. She set the bags down on the counter and pulled something from her coat pocket. A folded envelope. "Mark," she whispered, her voice tight, "this was on the windshield of my car." Mark unfolded it. His jaw tightened as he read the words written in thick black marker. "Stop the foundation, or your family pays the price." The paper shook in his hand. Not from fear but from rage. He had been prepared to fight Richard in boardrooms, in public opinion, even in court. But threatening Anna and Emily crossed a line that could never be forgiven. Anna's voice quivered. "What do we do?" Mark looked at her, his expression hard as stone. "We don't run. Not this time. He wants me scared, but I won't give him that. I won't let him take away the family I've just found." Still, when Emily ran into the room, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, Mark forced a smile, hiding the paper behind his back. She didn't need to see the darkness that was closing in. The next day Mark took action. He doubled the mansion's security, hired guards he trusted, and made sure Anna and Emily were never alone. But the attacks escalated. A clinic the foundation was building mysteriously caught fire overnight. The contractors swore it was an accident, but Mark knew better. Anonymous emails hit the media, claiming the foundation was funneling money offshore. Donors began to hesitate, afraid of being tied to a scandal. Then came the breaking point. Anna was on her way to a hospital visit when a black car followed her for miles. She called Mark, her voice trembling through the phone. "Mark, someone's behind me. They're not leaving." Mark's blood ran cold. He jumped into his own car and raced through the city, his mind on fire. By the time he found her, the black car had sped away, leaving Anna shaken and pale. He held her tightly, his jaw clenched. This ends now. The weeks passed quickly, and life inside Victor's mansion began to feel like something out of a dream. 4 years, Claire and Lily had lived in the shadow of fear and uncertainty. But now, each morning was met with sunlight pouring through wide windows, the aroma of fresh flowers from the garden drifting inside, and a sense of peace they had never dared to imagine. Yet beneath the joy, there was also the weight of new responsibilities. Victor had not simply given them a place to live. He had invited them into a new world, one filled with opportunities but also expectations. Claire often sat in the quiet of her new room, staring out at the vast gardens, asking herself if she truly belonged here. Could she accept this life without fear that it would all vanish? One afternoon, as she adjusted some of the therapy equipment in her suite, Victor stepped in, carrying a small box. "What's this?" Claire asked, arching an eyebrow. Victor placed it gently on the table. Inside were dozens of colorful seed packets: sunflowers, daisies, roses, lavender. "I thought you might want to start your own section of the garden," he said with a smile. "A place just for you and Lily." Claire's eyes softened, though her voice carried a touch of hesitation. "Victor, why are you doing all of this?" "For us." For a moment, the confident businessman seemed almost vulnerable. He leaned against the window frame, staring out at the endless green lawns. "Because for the first time in years I feel like I've found something real. You and Lily remind me what life is supposed to be about: love, hope, family. I don't want to let that go." Claire was silent. Deep down, her heart ached with gratitude, but she also feared depending on someone again. She had fought so long to survive on her own. "I just don't want Lily to get hurt," she whispered. Victor turned to her, his voice steady. "She won't. I give you my word. I'll protect her, and you, no matter what it takes." Meanwhile, Lily thrived in the new environment. Every day she discovered new corners of the mansion and its gardens, her laughter echoing down halls that had once been silent. She and Victor often teamed up on little projects, planting flowers, feeding the ducks at the pond, even designing a swing together on one of the giant oak trees. Watching them, Claire sometimes felt a pang of disbelief. Was this truly her life now? But the outside world had not forgotten them. One evening, while Claire sat with Victor in the living room, a thick envelope arrived. It bore the stamp of the City Housing Authority. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling. Inside were documents detailing the eviction and the mounting medical debt she still technically owed. The sight of it nearly broke her. Victor immediately took the papers, scanning them quickly. His jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "This is my problem now, not yours. I'll handle it." Claire shook her head fiercely. "No, Victor, I can't let you take on everything. These are my mistakes, my burdens. I don't want to feel like we're just charity." Victor knelt down in front of her, his eyes locking on hers with an intensity that made her heart pound. "Claire, listen to me. This isn't charity. It's family. You're not alone anymore. Let me help." The room was silent except for the crackle of the fireplace. Finally, Claire nodded slowly, though her doubts lingered. The very next day, Victor took action. He contacted his lawyers, arranged meetings with financial advisors, and began the process of settling every outstanding debt that had haunted Claire and Lily. For him, it was simply money. But for Claire, it was a lifeline, freedom from years of crushing fear. And yet, as all this unfolded, something deeper began to stir between Victor and Claire. At first, it was unspoken, a lingering glance across the dinner table, the warmth of his hand brushing against hers when they worked side by side in the garden. But over time, the unspoken grew harder to ignore. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Victor invited Claire to the pergola in the garden. The night was cool, the sky painted with stars and lanterns glowed softly among the vines. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he began. Claire's heart raced. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear it. She wasn't sure if she was ready. But she nodded. Victor exhaled deeply. "When I first met Lily, I thought she was just another kid on the street. But she showed me something I didn't know I was missing. And then I met you. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about life changed. I don't just want to give you shelter or help. I want you here because I need you here. Both of you. Claire felt her throat tighten. For so long she had built walls around her heart, convinced that love only led to pain. But looking at Victor now, she saw sincerity in his eyes that she couldn't deny. Still, fear whispered in her ear. Victor, don't say things you might regret. We've been through so much. I'm not sure I can, her voice cracked. He reached across the table, gently taking her hand. You don't have to decide tonight. Just know this, I'm not going anywhere. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, a future full of hope wasn't just a dream. But as the night wore on, none of them realized that outside the gates, shadows lingered. People from their past, debts and dangers they thought were behind them, were quietly waiting for the chance to return. And when they did, Victor, Claire, and Lily would be tested in ways they could never imagine. The following days at the mansion seemed calm on the surface, but Victor could sense something was shifting in the air. He had built his fortune by trusting his instincts, and those instincts now whispered caution. The gates were tall, the guards discreet, and the security system state-of-the-art, yet unease pressed in like a storm on the horizon. Claire noticed it too. She often caught Victor gazing out the window a little too long, or checking his phone with a tightness in his jaw he tried to hide. When she asked, he brushed it off with a smile. But Claire knew better. Life had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of danger. One afternoon, while Lily was playing in the garden, Claire decided to confront him. She found Victor in his study, surrounded by folders and glowing computer screens. You've been distracted, she said softly. Something's wrong. Victor paused, then closed the laptop with a sigh. His voice was calm but edged with steel. I didn't want to worry you, but I've been hearing things. The people who forced you out of your apartment, they don't let go easily. And there may be others, people who see me as a target because of my name, my wealth, or even because I chose to help you. Claire's heart dropped. Are you saying they could come here? After Lily? Victor's eyes hardened. Not if I can help it. I've doubled security, but I wanted to prepare you. If anything happens, you and Lily come first. Always. The weight of his words sank into Claire's chest like ice. She wanted to believe in the safety of the mansion and Victor's promises, but she also knew how relentless desperate people could be. She had lived it. That evening, Victor arranged for a family dinner in the grand hall. He wanted to restore a sense of normalcy to reassure them. The table was laid with silverware that sparkled under the chandelier, dishes prepared by the chef with delicate precision. Lily chattered happily about her day, waving her fork in the air as she described the new flower bed she and Victor had planted. But beneath the warmth of the moment, Claire couldn't shake her fear. She caught Victor's gaze across the table, and in his eyes she saw it too. Determination, yes, but also worry. After Lily was asleep, Victor led Claire to the library. The shelves stretched high with leather-bound books, the scent of old paper filling the air. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. I need you to trust me, he said. I do, Claire whispered, her fingers trembling around the glass. Good. Because there are things about my world you don't know yet. My wealth, it attracts enemies. Not everyone I've done business with is willing to let go of the past. And if they realize how much you and Lily mean to me, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. Claire's chest constricted. She reached for his hand. Then we face it together. I'm not running anymore. For a moment, his stern facade cracked. He squeezed her hand, his voice low. That's what I was afraid you'd say. You're stronger than you realize, Claire. That night, long after Claire had gone to bed, Victor stood on the balcony outside his room, watching the shadows stretch across the lawn. In the distance, beyond the mansion's walls, a pair of headlights flickered and disappeared. He clenched his fist. Whoever lingered in the darkness, he would be ready for them. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later. A delivery truck arrived at the gates, seemingly ordinary, but Victor's guards noticed something odd. 2 men in the cab, neither wearing uniforms. When questioned, the men sped away, disappearing into the city. Victor didn't tell Claire. He didn't want to frighten her, not yet. But that night, as Lily slept and Claire read by the fireplace, Victor took a phone call in the hall. His voice was low, but Claire could hear enough to understand. Find out who they are. I don't care what it costs. I want names, addresses, everything. Her stomach tightened. She set down her book and listened, her mind racing. Danger was closer than she thought. The following morning, Claire awoke to find Victor already gone, a note left on her nightstand. I'll be back before lunch. Stay inside the grounds. Don't worry, I've got this under control. But Claire couldn't help worrying. For years she had lived with nothing but uncertainty. And now, even in this palace of safety, the shadows were creeping back. Later that day, while walking with Lily near the oak tree swing, Claire spotted something, a figure at the far edge of the property just beyond the fence. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure disappeared into the trees before she could call out. Her heart pounded as she pulled Lily close. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, the gardens felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. That night, when Victor returned, she told him what she had seen. His face darkened, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and gave a series of sharp orders. Then he turned to Claire, his voice low and fierce. It's starting. But I promise you this, they won't touch you or Lily. Not while I'm breathing. Claire's chest ached with fear and something else, a strange, fierce trust. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the darkness alone. But deep down, she knew the battle ahead would test them all, in ways they could never have imagined. The tension inside the mansion grew heavier with each passing day. It was like a glass vase balanced on the edge of a table. One wrong move and everything would shatter. Victor had tripled the number of guards, set up motion detectors around the estate and reinforced the gates. But no matter how much steel and technology surrounded them, Claire felt the same chill of vulnerability she had known all her life. The whispers in the hallways didn't help. Staff spoke in hushed tones, exchanging glances when they thought no one noticed. Lily sensed it too. She clung to Claire more often, asking questions no child should have to ask. "Mommy, are the bad people coming back?" Claire always forced a smile. "Not while Victor is here, sweetheart. He won't let them." But even as she said the words, doubt prickled at the edges of her mind. One evening, Victor called a meeting in the study. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. Claire sat beside him, her hand resting nervously on her lap. A few of Victor's most trusted men stood nearby, their faces grave. Victor leaned forward, his voice low but unwavering. "We're dealing with more than just small-time criminals. The men who showed up at the gate belong to a network, a group with money, power, and nothing to lose. They've been probing for weakness, testing our defenses. They'll strike soon." Claire's chest tightened. "And when they do?" Victor's eyes softened just for her. "Then we'll be ready. But I need you to promise me something, Claire. If it comes to it, you take Lily and you run. Don't wait for me." She shook her head immediately, tears stinging her eyes. "No. We've lost too much already. I'm not leaving you behind." For a moment, the unshakable Victor looked almost human, torn between love and fear. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're braver than you know." That night, neither of them slept. Claire lay awake listening to the faint hum of security cameras outside, her heart racing at every creak in the floorboards. Around 3 in the morning she finally drifted off, Lily curled up beside her. She woke to the sound of shouting. The mansion was alive with noise, footsteps pounding, doors slamming, voices barking orders. Claire jolted upright, clutching Lily as the bedroom door burst open. It was one of Victor's guards. "Ma'am, you need to come with me. Now." Claire's pulse spiked. "What's happening?" "No time, just move." She scooped Lily into her arms and followed the guard down the hall, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor. Behind them, alarms blared, sharp and urgent. She caught glimpses through the windows, shadows moving across the lawn, figures climbing the fence, headlights cutting through the darkness. They were under attack. The guard led them to a hidden staircase at the far end of the corridor. Claire's mind reeled as she stumbled down the narrow steps, clutching Lily so tightly the child whimpered. At the bottom, they entered a small underground chamber, lined with steel walls and stocked with emergency supplies. "Stay here," the guard said. "Don't open the door for anyone but Victor." Then he was gone, the heavy door locking behind him. Claire sank onto the cold floor, her arms wrapped around Lily, trying to steady her breathing. Above them, the chaos raged on, distant gunfire, the crash of breaking glass, voices shouting commands. Lily buried her face in Claire's chest, trembling. "Sure, it's okay, baby," Claire whispered, though her own voice shook. "Victor's out there. He'll protect us." But in her heart, fear gnawed at her resolve. What if he didn't come back? What if the people upstairs broke through and found them here? Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then suddenly the chamber shook with a loud explosion. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lily screamed and Claire pulled her closer, her own heart slamming against her ribs. "Mommy, I'm scared." Lily sobbed. "I know, sweetheart. Me too. But we have to be brave just a little longer. Upstairs, Victor was fighting his own battle. Surrounded by his men, he moved like a man possessed, barking orders, firing back at the intruders. The once pristine halls of his mansion were now a war zone. But through it all, one thought burned in his mind like fire: protect Claire and Lily at all costs. As the attackers pressed forward, Victor realized something chilling. This wasn't just about money or revenge. It was personal. They wanted him broken, destroyed from the inside out. And what better way than to rip away the two people who had given his life meaning again? He swore, right there, that it would never happen. Not while he was still standing. Back in the hidden chamber, Claire pressed her ear against the steel door, listening for any sign that the nightmare above was ending. But the noise only grew louder. And then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming closer. Claire's blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they were right outside. Lily looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Is it Victor?" she whispered. Claire swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she pulled her daughter close. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." The footsteps stopped. And then 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed against the steel. The 3 knocks on the steel door echoed like a hammer against Claire's chest. Her breath caught. Lily clung to her shirt, tiny fingers trembling, eyes wide with fear. For a moment, the silence that followed was worse than the chaos outside. Claire pressed her ear against the cold surface, straining to hear. Then a voice cut through, low, steady, and familiar. "It's me. It's Victor. Open the door." Her heart leapt, but hesitation stopped her hand halfway to the lock. What if it was a trick? What if one of the intruders had captured Victor, or worse, and was now mimicking his voice? "Victor?" she called, her voice quivering. "Say something only you would know." Pause. Then the voice came again, rough with urgency but unmistakable. On Lily's 7th birthday, she wished for strawberry cake. The kind with the tiny chocolate flowers. You cried when she blew out the candles because you thought it would be her last. Claire's breath broke. Relief flooded her veins. She turned the lock with shaking hands, the steel door creaking open. Victor stood there, sweat streaking his face, a small cut above his brow. His eyes burned with determination, but his body radiated exhaustion. He swept inside, pulling Claire and Lily into his arms, holding them as if he'd never let go. "You're safe," he whispered hoarsely. "I told you I'd keep you safe." But even as he said it, the sounds of battle raged above. The clatter of boots, shouts, the sharp bark of gunfire. Claire clutched his arm. "Victor, we can't stay here. What if they find this place?" He nodded grimly. "You're right. The chamber was meant as a safe room, but if they're determined enough, they'll tear this mansion apart brick by brick." He looked into her eyes. "We have to move. Now." He led them back up the hidden staircase, every step tense with danger. When they emerged into the corridor, the mansion was unrecognizable. Smoke curled through shattered windows. Furniture was overturned, walls scarred with bullet holes. Claire shielded Lily's eyes, but the little girl still whimpered at the devastation. Victor moved swiftly, guiding them toward the east wing where the remaining guards were regrouping. As they rounded a corner, a figure stepped into their path. For a split second, time froze. It wasn't one of Victor's men. The intruder's face was shadowed by a mask, a weapon glinting in his hand. His voice was cold. "End of the line, Victor." Claire's heart stopped. She pushed Lily behind her instinctively, bracing for the worst. But Victor didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, his body tensed like a lion ready to strike. In one fluid motion he lunged. The struggle was brutal, the sound of fists and grunts filling the corridor. The gun clattered to the floor, skidding toward Claire. For a heartbeat she stared at it, paralyzed. Then something fierce awoke inside her. She snatched it up, her hands shaking but her aim steady enough to matter. "Let him go," she cried, her voice sharp, trembling with both fear and courage. The masked man froze, Victor's arm locked around his throat. Slowly, Victor twisted, disarming him and throwing him against the wall with a force that made the plaster crack. The intruder crumpled, unconscious. Victor turned to Claire, his gaze fierce but proud. "You did good." But there was no time to celebrate. More footsteps thundered down the hall. Victor grabbed Claire's wrist, pulling her and Lily into the east wing. They burst into a room where his guards had fortified a barricade. The men looked battered but resolute. "Sir, we can't hold them much longer," one of them said. Victor set his jaw. "Then we end this now." He turned to Claire, his voice low but steady. "Stay here. Protect Lily. Whatever happens, don't move until I come back." Her throat tightened. "Victor, please?" But he silenced her with a look, a fire in his eyes that told her this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was personal. He kissed Claire's forehead, then crouched to Lily's level. His voice softened. I love you, kiddo. Be brave for me, okay? Lily's eyes shimmered with tears. She nodded, clutching her mother's hand. Come back, Victor. Please. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, though his eyes betrayed the storm within him. Then he rose, took a weapon from one of his men and marched toward the door. The next few minutes blurred into chaos. Gunfire erupted, shouts echoed through the mansion, and the floor seemed to tremble beneath the weight of the fight. Claire held Lily close, whispering prayers she wasn't sure she believed. That silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Claire's heart pounded as she strained to hear. Were they safe? Had Victor won? Suddenly the door swung open. Smoke and dust drifted in. And there, framed in the haze, stood Victor, bloodied, battered, but alive. His men followed behind, fewer than before, but victorious. It's over, Victor said, his voice hoarse but steady. He staggered forward, gathering Claire and Lily into his arms. They'll never touch us again. Tears poured down Claire's face, her body shaking with relief. Lily hugged Victor tightly, her small voice muffled against his chest. I knew you'd come back. Victor closed his eyes, holding them both as if they were the only treasures he had left in the world. For the first time that night he allowed himself to believe it was true. They were safe. But deep down in the corners of his mind, a question lingered like a shadow. Was this truly the end, or just the beginning of a war he could never escape?